हरिः ओम् नमः सर्वेभ्यः। अष्टाध्यायी परिचयः इत्यस्य अद्य 31 पाठः। अस्माकं वर्गस्य चतुर्थप्रकरणस्य अद्य प्रारम्भं कुर्मः। शुक्लाम्बरधरं विष्णुं शशिवर्णं चतुर्भुजं प्रसन्नवदनं ध्यायेत् सर्वविघ्नोपशान्तये। येनाक्षरसमाम्नायमधिगम्य महेश्वरात् कृत्स्नं व्याकरणं प्रोक्तं तस्मै पाणिनये नमः। वाक्यकारं वररुचिं भाष्यकारं पतञ्जलिं पाणिनिं सूत्रकारं च प्रणतोऽस्मि मुनित्रयम्। अस्माकं वर्गस्य द्वे प्रयोजने आदौ स्मारयामि। तत्र मया किञ्चित् परिवर्तनं कृतमस्ति। लुकिङ्ग् एट् द स्पीड् आफ् द क्लास्, I think we can achieve a little bit more than what we thought earlier. So, अष्टाध्याय्याः आहत्य 600 instead of 400, 600 सूत्राणां व्याख्यासहितम् उदाहरणसहितं च अध्ययनम्। And अष्टाध्याय्याः प्रथमाध्यायस्य प्रथमपादस्य द्वितीयपादस्य च कण्ठस्थीकरणम्. So the Prathama Pada of the Prathamadhyaya, Vriddhiradaic, and so on, I asked you or suggested that you memorize it in the break that we had for 2.5 months. Hopefully, some of you might have memorized it. If not, you can still start. But given that 1.1 was already expected to be memorized by now, I'm extending the goal to memorize 1.2 as well. Those of you who have completed 1.1 can start with 1.2. So, अष्टाध्याय्याः प्रथमाध्यायस्य प्रथमपादस्य द्वितीयपादस्य च कण्ठस्थीकरणम् प्रारभामहे. So in our course we have completed 30 classes, then we took around 2.5 months break. So welcome back everyone. In the previous section we completed 3 modules which were fundamentally very basic aspects of Vyakarana Shastra, then specific aspects about Ashtadhyayi, and then some fundamental building blocks of Ashtadhyayi, namely the Samnya Sutras and the Paribhasha Sutras. Now, after the break, we are going to jump to the 4th module, that is the Sandhi Prakaranam. And starting from Sandhi Prakaranam, it is the core grammatical prakriya that is going to be fundamental part of our every class. Almost every homework will have some questions associated with prakriya. Because at the end of the day, Vyakarana is about Shabda Sadhutvam. It is about Pruthak Karanam, Sadhu Shabdanam, Asadhu Shabdebhya, Pruthak Karanam. And that happens only by explicitly showing a Prakriya which then derives a certain word as a Sadhu word. So we are going to talk about Prakriya extensively starting from today's class. And let me remind, all the way in class number 10 of our course, we discussed some aspects of the Prakriya. We learned what a Prakriya is. So Prakrititaha prarambham krutva, tadanantaram pratyasya yojanam krutva, agre vyakaranasya niyamaihi, prakrutau pratyeye cha bhinnani parivartanani krutva, antimasya pratyayanta shabdasya siddhehe paddhatihi. You start from the Prakriti, then you add a pratyaya, then you use various grammatical rules to do the transformations, and finally you create a sadhu word. This entire process is called prakriya. That is exactly what we are going to start learning in different aspects from today's class. We will first talk about Sandhi Prakaranam, then in the next module Subanta Prakaranam, Stri Prakaranam, Karaka Prakaranam, and so on. So now when it comes to the discussion on the Prakriya, let us focus on different aspects of this Prakriya. Let us focus on different parts of this Prakriya, specifically from the point of view of which Karya happens at what point in time in the Prakriya. So Prakriyayam Jayamanam Karyam Sthalam Nochit Karya Samayam Anusrutya. Sthalam means at what step in the Prakriya the Karya happens. And Karya Samayam is again the same thing, whether the Karya happens in the beginning or whether it happens in the middle or whether it happens at the end. So back in class number 10, we just understood about the Prakriya as a general entity. Like in the first step, there is a Prakriti, then you add Pratyaya, then you do the transformation, and finally a word is generated. But now we are going to zoom into that particular aspect and we are going to classify these steps, the steps that do the transformation. We are going to classify these steps into 5 important buckets. So prakriyayam jayamanam karyam, sthalam no chet karya samayam. These are synonymous in this context. Anusritya panchavidham asti. The very first type of karya is the prakritika karyam. So in the very first step of the prakriya, we add a prakriti, and then on the next step, even before the pratyaya is added, sometimes there is some transformation that happens on the prakriti. So pratyayasya yojanat purvam nochet pratyaya sanniyogena. So along with the pratyaya, some transformation happens, or before the pratyaya is added, some transformation happens on the prakriti. This is called prakrutika karyam. The word is very obvious. Prakrutika means prakruti related. So prakritika karyam pratyasi yojanat purvam pratyaya sanniyogena yat karyam bhavati. Obviously, this is all the way at the beginning of the prakriya. So, for example, nama, namati, namata, namanti, that verb, औपदेशिक रूपम तस्य नम इति अस्ति. अस्य नम इति धातोः आदिस्थस्य णकारस्य प्रत्यययोजनात् पूर्वम एव नकारः भवति. So, in the first step of the prakriya, you write the dhatu nama because it is how it is written in the dhatu patha, and then on the immediate next step, before you add any tiptas, ji, pratyaya, whatever, you have to convert it to nama. So nakarasya nakaraha bhavati. Another example, kanya iti ekam pratipadikam asti. There is a tadhita pratyaya called ana which is to be added on this word kanya. There is a sutram in tadhita prakaranam for that. As soon as you add the ana pratyaya on the word kanya, right in that step itself, the word kanya gets converted to kanina. So kanya becomes kanina plus ana. So the ana pratyaya brings the transformation on the prakriti along with it. So pratyaya sanniyogena parivartanam bhavati, and then the further prakriya happens. So remember, prakriti is of two types. You have dhatu or you have a pratipadikam. I have given one example of dhatu, one example of pratipadikam. Pratyasya yojanat purvam pratyaya sanniyogena cha yat karyam bhavati tat prakritika karyam asti. That is the first type of karya. You should always do it at the beginning of the prakriya. Then is the time to add the pratyaya. So pratyaya karyam. Pratyaya karyam means pratyasya yojanam bhavati. Pratyasya yojana samaye yojanat anantaram va pratyaye kinchit parivartanam bhavati. So the pratyaya gets added, that is also pratyaya karya. Then the pratyaya might get transformed, that is also pratyaya karya. So shvasa means shvaha, tomorrow. The original pratipadika is shvasa. श्वस इति प्रातिपदिकात् ट्यू इति कश्चन तद्धित प्रत्ययः यदा युज्यते तदा ट्यू इति प्रत्ययस्य कश्चन आगमः भवति, तदनन्तरं कश्चन आदेशः भवति. So this individual prakriya that is written on the slide is not important. Just understand that there is some transformation in the pratyaya as soon as the pratyaya is added. So when you want to add the tyu pratyaya, it comes along with the tit agama called tutta, and then the tyu pratyaya is converted to ana. So all this process, pratyasya yojana samaye, pratyasya yojanat anantaram va, pratyaye parivartanam bhavati, this all process is pratyaya karyam. Now once the pratyaya comes and sits, a fundamental samnya comes in the picture. We all know this samnya, anga samnya. Whenever there is a pratyaya, yasmat pratyayadhi tadadi pratyaye angam. So whenever a pratyaya is added, the anga samnya comes in the effect. We understand what entity is now called anga, and now there is a huge section in Ashtadhyayi, the entire anga adhikara, that talks about the transformations associated with the anga. So pratyasya yojanadanantaram angasanya yada labhyate तदा अंगसंज्ञायां सत्याम अंगस्य इति अधिकारे विद्यमानं कार्यं भवति. Even though angasya is a shashti ekvachanam, it is not necessarily only the karya on the anga, it is the karya in the context of the anga. So it may be angasya, it may be angat vihitasya pratyayasya, So it can also be on a pratyaya which is attached to the anga. So any karya that happens in the context of the anga is called anga karyam. So for example, deva iti pratipadikaat नाम इति षष्ठी प्रत्यय षष्ठी बहुवचनस्य प्रत्ययः यदा युज्यते तदा देव इति अंगस्य दीर्घादेशः भवति. So first deva gets the anga samnya and then there is a dirghadesha. So devanam. Another example, देव इति अंगात विहितस्य टा प्रत्ययस्य इन आदेशः भवति. So the tritiya ekvachanasya ta pratyaya, it is added to the deva, then deva becomes anga, and once deva becomes anga, asmat angat vihitasya ta iti pratyasya in adeshah bhavati devena iti rupam siddhyati. अनेन प्रकारेण प्रत्ययस्य योजनादनन्तरम् अंगकार्यं तत्र विधीयते. And when I say anga karyam, it is not necessarily single step. We can have multiple steps of anga karya. After the anga karya comes varna karyam. Varneshu jayamanam parivartanam. Transformation on the individual letters. So contrast this with the previous three. In case of prakrutika karyam, pratyaya karyam or anga karyam, a high level entity called prakruti or pratyaya or anga has to exist first. So prakrutika karyam can happen only when there is prakruti. Pratyaya karya can happen only when there is pratyaya. Anga karya can happen only when there is anga. On the contrary, Varna Karya is just a transformation on the letters. We don't care whether that letter comes from Dhatu, Pratipadika, Pratyaya, Anga, Pada, doesn't really matter. Varneshu Jayamanam Parivartanam. So in this previous example, when you say Deva plus Ina, the ta pratyaya has been converted to ina, and when you say deva plus ina, it is just akara and ikara that combine to form ekara. So akara ikarayoho ekadeshe, we all know the term called ekadesha, I have taught it earlier. So akara ikarayoho ekadeshe ekaraha. Here you don't care whether that akara is coming from dhatu or anga or pratyaya, doesn't really matter, is just pure varna karya. So that's the fourth step. And the fifth step, which usually happens all the way at the end because the sutras of this step are usually in the tripadi, that is the pada karya. Padasya sandarbhena jayamanam karyam. When you attach a sup or a ting pratyaya to a prakruti, eventually the entire configuration is going to be called a pada, and there are some transformations that happen in the context of the pada. So padasya sandarbhena jayamanam karyam, it is written at the end because typically it happens in the tripadi. Obviously there are some exceptions, but more or less on the majority these are the sutras of padakarya are in tripadi. So vacha iti padamasti ityukte vacha plus su iti pratyaya. The su pratyaya is removed by some sutra, and whatever that vacha is remaining, tasya chakarasya padante kutvam bhavati. So su pratyaya is removed, but that pratyaya is still invisibly there. So the suptingantam padam, that sutra is going to give a pada samnya, and therefore padante kutvam bhavati. So vacha becomes vak. This is a sutra in tripadi. In this way, if you look at any prakriya in Sanskrit grammar of those thousands of millions of prakriyas, every step you can classify it more or less into these buckets. Some steps here and there, they are on the edge, whether you call it Angakarya or Prakritika Karya or Pratyakarya and so on. But on majority, you can classify the steps as Prakritika Karyam, Pratyakaryam, Angakaryam, Varnakaryam, and Padakaryam. Now, why did I tell all this? Because today's topic, Sandhi Prakaranam. So, Sandhi Prakaranam is a very important topic at the beginning of Siddhanta Kaumudi and Laghu Siddhanta Kaumudi. So, as soon as the Samnyas and Paribhashas are done, the authors start teaching Sandhi Prakaranam. And unlike other prakaranas like Angadhikara or Padadhikara or even Anatva Prakaranam, Idagama, and so on, there is no specific Sandhi Prakaranam inside Ashtadhyayi as a direct list of sutras. Instead, Siddhanta Kaumudyam Vishishtani Varnakaryani तथा च विशिष्टानि पदकार्याणि सन्धिः इति नाम्ना स्वीकृत्य सन्धि प्रकरणे पाठितानि सन्ति. So what is Sandhi Prakaranam in Siddhanta Kaumudi? Compare and contrast it with Karaka Prakaranam, Tadhita Prakaranam, Krudanta Prakaranam, and so on. Karaka Prakaranam is about Karaka Dhikara. There is a full Karaka Dhikara in Ashtadhyayi in 1.4. Tadhita Prakaranam is about Tadhita Dhikara. There is a Tadhita Dhikara in Ashtadhyayi in 4.1. Krudanta Prakaranam is about Krudanta Krudadhikara. Samasa Prakaranam is about Samasadhikara. So all these other prakaranas, Panini has himself created those prakaranas and put them under adhikaras. Contrary to that, there is no sandhi adhikara in Ashtadhyayi, but some of the varnakaryas, not all. It is completely up to the decision of Siddhanta Kaumudikara which varnakaryas to take. And there are different prakriya granthas and you don't see a unanimity. Some prakriya granthas take some sutras, some other leave some other sutras, and so on. But more or less, a specific set of varnakaryas and a specific set of padakaryas are included in Siddhanta Kaumudi under the name of Sandhi Prakaranam. And some of these is what we are going to study starting from today's class. So we are not going to focus on Prakritika Karyam, Pratyaya Karyam and Anga Karyam, at least for this module. We are going to talk about some Varna Karyas and some Pada Karyas. Let us talk about this in a little bit more details. So as I mentioned, Ashtadhyayam Sandhihi iti shabdaha na vidyate, Vishishtani Varnakaryani Padakaryani eva Samanya Rupena Sandhihi iti namna Prasiddhani Santi. So this is a vague area. Some might put one sutra, some might not put one sutra, and so on. Tani eva Siddhanta Kaumudyadishu Grantheshu Sandhi Prakarane Pathitani Labhyante. And Sandhi is a Pullinga Shabda in Sanskrit, not Sa Sandhi. Usually in Hindi or local languages, we tend to make it feminine. Samskrute Ayam Sandhi, Eshaha Sandhi, Saha Sandhi iti Vaktavyam. So Sandhi is a Pullinga Shabda. सन्धि प्रकरणे किमस्ति मुख्य रूपेण वर्णकार्याणि कानिचन पदकार्याणि अपि सन्ति. Even when there are padakaryas, it is mainly the varna vikara in that padakarya because of which it is put in the sandhi prakaranam. So as I showed in the previous slide, vacha to vaka, this is a padakarya, but technically it is a cha converted to ka. So at the end of the day, it is a varna karya. So embedded in the padakarya is basically hidden varna karya. That kind of padakaryas, and obviously the varna karyas are part of the sandhi prakaranam. So sandhi prakarane mukhyatve varna karyani santi. And what is a varna karya? It is a varneshu jayamanam parivartanam. Some transformation must happen. Varna vikaraha kinchit parivartanam tatra bhavet. Etadrishaha varna vikaraha पदकार्ये भवति चेदेव संधि प्रकरणे तस्य समावेशः क्रियते. And an important point to understand in this context is Varna Vikara is not Varna Melanam. Kevalam Varna Melanam asti tarhi tat sandhi iti namna na pariganyate. So if you just combine phalam plus atra to make phalamatra, it is not a sandhi. Sandhi karyeshu parivartanam avashyakam. Some transformation should happen. So for example, deva plus ina, devena. So a and e is getting combined to form a. That transformation is called sandhi. So sandhi karyeshu varneshu parivartanam avashyakam vartate. And this parivartanam is of 4 types. This is already taught to you. Because sandhikarya is just one of the few steps, like varnakarya and padakarya are steps in the prakriya, and any transformation in the step of a prakriya is of 5 types. Pratyaya vidhanam, which we will keep aside because pratyaya vidhanam happens all the way at the beginning. The remaining 4 are adesha, agama, dvitva, and lopa, and all these can be found in varna vikara. So Varna Vikaraha Chaturvidha. You cannot have the 5th one because Varna Vikara is a part of a Prakriya and only 5 things can happen in Prakriya. Pratyaya, Adesha, Agama, Lopa and Dvitva, and Pratyaya is already done. So 4 are remaining. So Varna Vikaraha Chaturvidha, Adeshaha, Agamaha, Lopaha and Dvitvam. So example, Adeshaha, Maha plus Ishaha becomes Maheshaha. आकार इकारयोः एकादेशः एकत्ररूपेण द्वयोः स्थाने एकः आदेशः भवति, एकादेशे एकारः विधीयते, एतत् सन्धिकार्यम् अस्ति. So this is an example of आदेश causing the वर्ण परिवर्तनं वर्ण विकारः, and therefore this is सन्धिकार्यम्. आगमः, वृक्ष plus छाया becomes वृक्षच्छाया. Extra ch comes over there, so that's an agama. Akarat anantaram tugagamah vidhiyate. We are going to learn this sandhi today. This is also sandhi karyam because an agama has happened. लोपः, कः स्थास्यति becomes क स्थास्यति. विसर्गस्य लोपः भवति. This is also sandhi karyam. द्वित्वम, ब्रह्मा, ह plus म plus a, ह plus म, that म is now doubled. ब्रह्मा, मकारस्य द्वित्वम भवति, इदमपि सन्धिकार्यम्. सो सन्धिकार्यम् इत्युक्ते वर्णं परिवर्तनम्, इत्युक्ते वर्णविकारः, सः चतुर्विधः, आदेशः, आगमः, लोपः, द्वित्वः. I have given one example of each. Now, focusing on this particular adesha, remember that we have talked about adeshas in detail. There are four types of adeshas: antyadeshah, adyadeshah, sarvadeshah, ekadeshah. So that is one type of classification, but from the point of view of sandhis specifically, that is from the point of view of varna vikara, there is yet another way in which adeshas can be classified. So, ekasya varnasya sthane dvayoho varnayoho sthane va नूतन वर्णस्य यत् स्थापनं क्रियते इत्युक्ते यः आदेशः अस्ति सः सन्धि प्रकरणस्य सन्दर्भेण चतुर्विधः ज्ञेयः. So we already have studied four types: ekadesha, sarvadesha, adyadesha, antyadesha. That's a general classification that is different. In this particular classification, this is specifically focused on the sutras of the Sandhi Prakaranam. So Sandhi Prakaranasya sandarbhena ayam adeshaha chaturvidhaha purvadeshaha. So when you have x plus y and a sandhi is going to happen, the transformation happens only on x, not on y. So kevalam purva varnasya sthane eva nutana varnaha vidhiyate. Even though it is x plus y is unchanged, only the transformation on x happens. So 1a plus iti, normal ayadi sandhi, 1a plus iti, 1a becomes 1a. Aya adeshah bhavati. So ekarasya ayadeshah, iti remains as it is, 1iti. So this is purvadesha. And purvadesha happens on the last letter of that x. So purva shabdasya antima varnasya sthane ayam vidhiyate, atah ayam antyadeshah asti. So I am just mapping the previous categories with the new categories. Whatever we studied earlier, antyadesha, sarvadesha, adyadesha, and so on. So this purvadesha in the sandhis is basically antyadesha because it is going to happen on the last letter of the purva word. Similarly, the counterpart is paradesha. So when the sandhi x plus y happens, only y changes, x does not change. So kevalam paravarnasya sthane nutana varnaha vidhiyate. So tada plus hitam, only hakara gets converted to dha. Tada plus dhitam, tadhitam. So ayam adeshah parashabdasya prathama varnasya sthane vidhiyate. Atah ayam adyadeshah. So essentially this categorization is same as the previous one, but we are not going to use the words antyadesha and adyadesha in these particular sandhi related classes. We are going to talk about the words purvadesha and paradesha. Purvadesha is a transformation only on x, paradesha is a transformation only on y. And then third is ekadesha, purva parayoho sthane ekaha varnaha. So there is a transformation on x and there is a transformation on y. So purva parayoho sthane ekaha eva varnaha adesha rupena vidhiyate. Maha plus isha, a and e etayoho sthane ekaraha adesha rupena vidhiyate. So mahesha ityatra ekadesha asti. So x plus y, both x and y are changed to something another called z. Now, when it comes to this Ekadesha, there are two subcategories which are special categories. So, general Ekadesha is not going to belong to any of these categories, but there are some special subsets of Ekadesha. So, asya do vishishta bhedau staha. Purvarupa Ekadesha. X plus Y becomes X, which means the two things are combined, but the result is same as the first. This is different than Purvadesha or Paradesha. In Purvadesha or Paradesha, one entity is untouched. In case of Purvadesha, only X changes, Y is untouched. In Paradesha, only Y changes, X is untouched. But in case of Purvarupa Ekadesha, X and Y are both changed. Answer is again X. It is like 0 multiplied by 5 is 0. So 0 and 5 both participate in the multiplication, but the answer is 0. So पूर्वरूप एकादेशः पूर्वपरयोः स्थाने पूर्ववर्णः एव आदेशरूपेण विधीयते. So 1a plus asmin, 1a a plus a becomes a. And similarly, the counterpart paradesha or pararupa ekadesha. So purvaparayoho sthane paravarnaha eva adesha rupena vidhiyate. So you have pra plus a jate, a plus a becomes a. So earlier a plus a was becoming a. So pararupa purvarupa ekadesha. Now you have pararupa ekadesha, pra a plus a becoming a. And in cases like Maha plus Isha, it is neither Purvarupa Ekadesha nor Pararupa Ekadesha. It is just Ekadesha because A and E are combining to form yet another Z, third letter called A. So this is Pararupa Ekadesha and Purarupa Ekadesha as two subcategories of Ekadesha. So these were the three classes: Purvadesha, Paradesha, Ekadesha, and finally Padante Adesha. That is the Padakarya. Remember, Varnakarya and Padakarya together are included in the Sandhi Prakaranam. So if you have just X, there is no Y, then Padante Adesha Sambhavati. Padanta Vyanjanasya Adesha Bhavati. Vacha becomes Vaka. This is Padante Adesha. It just needs to be a pada and the last letter has to be transformed. You don't need anything else after that. So you don't need x plus y. You just need x and that x must be pada. So asyam sthitau padante adeshaha iti adeshaha vidhiyate ayamapi antyadesha because it is happening on the last letter. So we have another example of antyadesha over here. So from the point of view of Sandhi Prakaranam, there is no Sarvadesha. There is Antyadesha, which is of two types. Then there is Adyadesha, and then there is Ekadesha. These are the names: the Purvadesha, the Paradesha, the Ekadesha, and Padanta Adesha. These are the names that we are going to use in the classes going ahead. Vidyaji.
नमस्कारः महोदय. अस्मिन् तत्र अवगच्छामि यत् तत्र अस्मिन् इति अकारस्य तत्र ने इत्यस्य स्थाने इत्येतयोः स्थाने ने इत्येव भवति इति. तत्र लोपः इति कुतः न उच्यते? अकारस्य लोपः इत्यपि वक्तुं शक्नुमः किल?
तत्र किमस्ति सूत्रकारेण कथम् अस्य वर्णनं कृतं तद् मया अत्र उच्यते. If you take lopaha, then there might be other implications because when some entity undergoes a lopa, it might come over there because of that entity coming back or something like that. So it is likely that there are some other implications. Atha sutrakarena tatra purvarupa ekadesha iti ukta asti. You might be able to create parallel rules by calling it as a lopa, but that's not how Sutrakara does it.
प्रश्नः एवमस्ति महोदय, तत्र कुत्र लोपः इति वक्तुं शक्नुमः? कुत्र पूर्वरूपसन्धिः, पूर्वरूप एकादेशः इत्यादिकं वक्तुं शक्नुमः इति न अवगच्छामि. तत्र सूत्रेण एव उच्यते वा तत्सर्वं?
एतत् सर्वं सूत्रेणैव उच्यते. सूत्रे पूर्वरूपं भवति इति उक्तमस्ति चेत् पूर्वरूपं भवति. सूत्रे लोपः भवति इति उक्तमस्ति चेत् लोपः भवति.
धन्यवादः.
And then there are further additional reasons why a lopa does not happen over here. There is something called antavad bhava, adivad bhava, and so on. I do not want to go into those details, but there is already an existing akara over there, which is different than what happens when an akara undergoes a lopa. So after considering all these things, it is likely that the Maharshi has created it as a Purvarupa Ekadesha. Any more questions? Okay, agre gacchamaha. Now when it comes to the topic of sandhis, something that we just cannot forget and should not forget is samhita. So varnanam atishay sannidhyam iti samhita prasannikarsha samhita iti sutram. Sandhi karyartham samhita avashyaki. संहिता अस्ति चेत् संधिः नित्यं भवति. संधेः अवकाशः अपि भवेत्, परन्तु संहिता अस्ति चेत् संधेः अवकाशे जाते संधिः नित्यं भवति. संहिता नास्ति चेत् संधिः न भवति. सो इफ यू हैव इति प्लस अपि, अत्र संहितायाः विवक्षायां, डोंट से सत्याम, आई विल टॉक अबाउट इट इन अ मिनट. संहितायाः विवक्षायां, लेट मी फिक्स दिस ओवर हियर. संहितायाः विवक्षायां इत्यत्र संहितायाः विवक्षायाम् इत्युक्ते इफ यू आर इमेजिनिंग अ संहिता, संधिकार्यम् अवश्यं करणीयं. संहिता नास्ति चेत् संधिकार्यं कर्तुं न शक्यते. And Samhita kutra kutra nitya asti. So this shloka has already been taught. There were questions about this in the exam as well. Samhita ikapade nitya nitya dhatu upasargayoho nitya samase vakye tu sa vivaksham apekshate. So ekapade nitya, ekasmin pade vidyamananam varnanam madhye samhita nitya asti. So deva plus ina, this is a single pada, suptingantam padam. So deva is a pratipadika, ina is a pratyaya. You combine them to form a pada. Tatra samhita nitya asti. So sandhi is compulsory. You just cannot keep it as deva ina. धातु तथा उपसर्गः एतयोर मध्ये संहिता नित्या अस्ति पर्यटति. समासस्य पूर्वोत्तर पदयोः मध्ये संहिता नित्या अस्ति दैत्यारी. You cannot keep individual entities. And वाक्यस्य पदयोः मध्ये संहिता वक्तुः इच्छाम् अनुसरति. तत्र संहितायाः विवक्षा अस्ति चेत् सन्धि अवश्यं करणीयः, नो चेत् नैव करणीयः. So संहितायाः विवक्षा अस्ति चेत् देवी प्लस आगता becomes देव्यागता. संहिता नास्ति चेत् देवी आगता इति पृथक् रूपेण लेखनीयम्. So in this way, samhita is compulsory in 3 different cases. 2 specific things to remember. वाक्यस्य शब्दयोः मध्ये परस्पर संबंधः अस्ति वा इत्यस्य चिन्तनं नावश्यकम्. You do not need to understand the meaning of the words. You do not need to understand whether there is a relation between the two. वाक्यस्य शब्दयोः मध्ये परस्पर संबंधः अस्ति वा इति न चिन्तनीयम्. तत्र संहितायाः विवक्षा अस्ति चेत् सन्धि अवश्यं संभवति. So even if the words are completely unrelated, if there is an expectation or interest of doing having a samhita, the sandhi will happen. So here is an example. Chitram Ramasya alaye Krishnasya. The portrait of Rama is in the house of Krishna. Chitram Ramasya alaye Krishnasya. Now in this particular sentence, there is absolutely no relation between Ramasya and alaye. It is not Rama's house. The chitra is of Rama and the house is of Krishna. So you cannot do a samasa over here. You cannot say Ramalaye. Understand this. Ramasya alaye are together. But you cannot do samasa because samasa requires mutual relation. Are you talking about the house of Rama? The answer is no. You are talking about the house of Krishna and you are talking about the portrait of Rama. So even though Ramasya and Alaya are sitting next to each other, there is no anvaya between the two. There is no paraspara sambandha between the two. So you cannot do samasa over here. You cannot say Ramalaya. But nevertheless, you can always do sandhi even if the words are unrelated. Sandhi does not require mutual relationship or anvaya between the words because it is not a padakarya or angakarya or shabdakarya at all. Sandhi looks only at letters. There is a akara at the end of Ramasya. There is akara at the beginning of Alaya. The conditions of Varna Parivartanam, Varna Vikara are satisfied. The Varna Vikara will happen. So Ramasya plus Alaye इत्यत्र संहितायाः विवक्षायां संधिं कृत्वा Chitram Ramasyalaye Krishnasya. Sounds very weird, it is confusing, but it is grammatically correct. Chitram Ramasyalaye Krishnasya iti avashyam vaktum shakyate. I'm going to touch upon this topic many modules later because there are concepts in Sanskrit grammar, samasa, karaka or kridanta, tadhita, sanadyanta pratyaya, ekashesha and so on. All these will require mutual relationship between the words. Contrary to that, there is no mutual relationship needed. Obviously, if it is there, no issues, but no mutual relationship needed for doing the sandhi karya. So this is the first rule to understand. And second rule, even though the shloka Samhita Ekapade Nitya does not talk about it, padyasya vishaye, when there is a line in a padya, a kavya, padyasya shabdeshu yatim vihaya anyatra samhita nitya asti. So most of you probably know what is a yati. Yati is a place where the chanda, the rules of the chanda allow you to take a minor pause, allow you to take a minor break. Usually padante yati asti, madhye madhye api kutrachit yatihi sambhavati. Except for the places of those pauses, everywhere else in a padya, samhita is always compulsory. So, astyuttarasyam dishi devatatma himalayo nama nagadhirajaha. While speaking it as the padya, you cannot break asti and uttarasyam. There is a compulsory samhita over there. When you are doing anvaya, you can do whatever you want. Uttarasyam dishi Himalayah nama nagadhirajaha devatatma asti. You can write whatever you want. But when it is a padya, the samhita and therefore sandhi is compulsory. Astyuttarasyam, there has to be yana sandhi done over there. Similarly, uttarasyam dishi, you have to write anuswara over there because the anuswara sandhi is happening, or you can write a nakara by doing a parasavarna, but you cannot write makara over there. And then devatatma, obviously devata plus atma you cannot split, it is a samasa. Himalayo nama, you cannot write himalayah nama, and so on. So sandhi is compulsory in a padya except for yati. So far was the background. Now let's talk about the sandhi karyam. So adhyayana saulabhyartham sandhi karyam. Whatever we are going to study in the next 10 classes. Adhyayana saulabhyartham sandhi karyam purva varnasya adharena x plus y. You look at the last letter of x. So purva varnasya adharena chaturdha vibhajyate. This is a no-brainer actually. Ach sandhi इत्युक्ते तत्सन्धिकार्यं यत्र पूर्ववर्णः स्वरः अस्ति. You do not look at y, you only look at x. See the last letter of x. Ach sandhi इत्युक्ते तत्सन्धिकार्यं यत्र पूर्ववर्णः स्वरः अस्ति. So iti plus api ityapi or Rama plus Chhatra becomes Ramachhatra. I have purposely given two examples. In the first example, y also starts with a swara. In the second example, y starts with a vyanjana. This is to emphasize that you are not supposed to look at y, you are only supposed to look at x. The last letter of x must be swara and then it is called ach sandhi. Similarly, hal sandhi. Tat skandhikaryam yatra purva varnaha vyanjanamasti. Do not look at y. Purva varnaha vyanjanamasti. And when there is no y, padanta karyamasti. Tatrapi padante vidyamanasya vyanjanasya karyamapi hal sandhishu eva svikriyate. So tasmin plus iti becomes tasminniti. There is a swara in y, but you don't have to worry about it. Look at the last letter of x, that is vyanjanam. Tad plus hitam, tadhitam. And then padanta karyam. So brahman becomes brahma. The na is removed at the padanta. This is also the vyanjana sandhi or hal sandhi. And then there is a dvitva, that is also hal sandhi because ma is getting replicated. So these are examples of hal sandhi. Third is the visarga sandhi. Tat sandhikaryam yatra purva varnaha visargaha asti. So ramaha plus saha. The visarga is converted to sakara. So ramas saha. So this is another example. This is example of visarga sandhi. And finally, there is a very special category called swadi sandhi. This is a sandhi where the purva varna, the last letter of X, is the su pratyaya. So for example, you have Rama plus su plus gacchati. You want to say Ramaha gacchati, but in the prakriya, how is it looking? It is looking as Rama plus su plus gacchati. This type of sandhi which happens between this su and this gacchati, this type of sandhi is called swadi sandhi. Su plus adi, su and others. So swadi sandhi. So su plus gacchati, what happens in this particular prakriya? Su gets converted to something called ru. So you say Rama plus ru plus gacchati. Then ru gets converted to something called u. So Rama plus u plus gacchati. And then a plus u, normal ach sandhi happens and Ramo gacchati. So all the time in the introductory classes of Vyakarana, you always said that Ramaha gacchati becomes Ramo gacchati, and you classified it as a Visarga Sandhi. That classification might be okay for a general grammatical discussion at the introductory level, but when it comes to Ashtadhyayi, when it comes to the proper studies of sutras, Ramo gacchati is not a Visarga Sandhi. If you start with Ramaha and gacchati, there is no way in Ashtadhyayi you can create Ramo gacchati starting from Ramaha and gacchati. In creation of Ramo gacchati, there is no visarga involved. You must start with the su pratyaya. Su gets converted to ru gets converted to u, and further u gets converted to o by combining with akara. That's how most of the visarga sandhis that you have studied so far. You will call it visargasya okara desha. You will call it visargasya refa desha. So munir gacchati, visargasya refa desha. No, there is no munir gacchati visargasya refa desha. There is no visarga involved at all. It is a swadi sandhi. Bala hasanti visargasya lopaha. There is no visarga lopaha there. It is a swadi sandhi. So in the introductory level, everything is messed up and clubbed up under Visarga Sandhi. But Visarga Sandhis are very specific small set of Sandhis where a Visarga is actually involved in the Prakriya. It is a starting step of that Sandhi. So if you go from Ramaha to Saha, if you combine Ramaha plus Saha with a Visarga, the Visarga is getting converted to Sakara. This is Visarga Sandhi. But in case of Ramo Gacchati or Munir Gacchati or Balah Santi and so on, it is not a Visarga Sandhi, it is a Swadi Sandhi. We will talk about it in details in the last class of our module. So out of the 10 classes of our module, I want to spend 3 classes on Ach Sandhi, 4 classes on Hal Sandhi, 4 plus 3, 7, 1 or maybe 5 classes on Hal Sandhi, 1 on Visarga Sandhi, and 1 on Swadi Sandhi. So this way, we are going to divide the study of Sandhis in 10 classes. And where in Ashtadhyayi is all these present? Ach Sandhis are present in 6.1. So the sutras of Ach Sandhi are present in 6.1. The sutras of Hal Sandhi are present in entirely Tripadi 8.2, 8.3, 8.4. Sutras are Visarga Sandhi are also in 8.3, and the sutras of Swadi Sandhi are divided between 8.2, 8.3, and a few of them are in 6.1. So essentially, Sandhi Prakaranam is all about 6.1 and Tripadi. Sandhi Prakaranasya prayed sarvani api sutrani षष्ठाध्यायस्य प्रथमे पादे नो चेत् त्रिपाद्याम santi. And then let's talk about the 3 samhitadhikaras. This is already taught to you all. So samhitayam iti prathamaha samhitadhikaraha. This includes the rules of the swara sandhi, swadi sandhi, and so on. Then there is a dvitiya samhitadhikara, which is for the samasa, and then there is tritiya samhitadhikara, which is for the vyanjana sandhi. So all these samhitadhikaras are already taught to you. The interesting point, which I'm just going to slightly touch upon without going in the details, is that even though there are these samhitadhikaras, and even though we are always saying that samhitayam sandhi bhavati, samhitaya vivaksha asti chet sandhi bhavati, and so on, technically what the grammarians argue is that None of these samhitadhikaras are actually required in Ashtadhyayi. Ashtadhyayam samhitadhikaraha navashakaha. This is a slightly advanced topic. This is out of scope or out of syllabus for us. I'm just giving as an extra information. All the sutras are embedded in the Samhitadhikara by Panini Maharshi. So Swara Sandhi is in one Samhitadhikara, Vyanjana Sandhi is in another Samhitadhikara, and so on. But the grammarians, Nagesha, Kayyata, and others have given logical arguments, and they have said none of the Samhitadhikaras are required. Why not required? Very beautiful argument. They say that sandhis usually happen when you have x plus y. So this is your primary condition of sandhi, and you are saying there must be samhita between x and y. Kayata says, look at the sutra. How is a sutra constructed? The sutra is going to give y as a paranimitta and x as a purvanimitta, which means x will be in the panchami vibhakti, y will be in the saptami vibhakti. And whenever you are using panchami vibhakti, it is always avyavahita purvasya. When you are always using, when you are using panchami vibhakti, it is always avyavahita parasya. And when you are using saptami vibhakti, it is always avyavahita purvasya. Remember the avyavahita word, without any disturbance, without even a break. So when you are using panchami and saptami vibhakti in all these sutras, which automatically indicate that there cannot be a gap, you don't need a special samhitadhikara to repeat the same thing. So that's their argument. There is a little more to it, but I have cut it off. We don't need to discuss that. But the gist is sandhikaryanam sandarbhena samhitadhikaraha navashyakaha yato hi panchamyantena saptamyantena va padena avyavahita varnasyeva nirdeshah bhavati. So as a concrete example, when you say ikoyanachi, ikaha is a shashti, achi is a saptami. So you are going to translate it as achi pare, which means avyavahitasya purvasya karyam bhavati. No chet ach varnaha avyavahitaha paraha bhavet. So as soon as you use a saptami, tasmin niti nirdishte purvasya and tasmad ityuttarasya, there is that avyavahitatva इत्युक्ते सन्निकृष्टत्व is automatically coming. अतः अत्र सूत्रे एव संहिता अस्ति. The sutra itself talks about paraha sannikarshah, that is samhita, and therefore pruthak samhita adhikaraha navashyakaha. This is what an argument is being done by the Shastrakaras. But we will keep this aside. We will be considering Samhita Adhikaras. We will talk about the Samhitayam Sutra also today after a few minutes. But this is just to be kept at the back of mind. Any questions at the moment? So with this background, now the actual class is starting, 30 more minutes probably. So atra idanim ach sandhehe kinchit khagavalokanam kurmaha. So as I mentioned, ach sandhi, the sutras are in 6.1.72. So this samhitadhikara 6.1.72 samhitayam, this samhitadhikara has all the sutras of ach sandhi. So starting from 6.172 up to 6.1.157, some 80 sutras around, is this entire samhitadhikara. And in this samhitadhikara, all sutras of ach sandhis are there. So tatra adau samhitayam iti samhitadhikara asti, goes till 6.157. In this samhitadhikara, right in the beginning after the samhitayam are the sutras of purvadesha. Remember these words. I taught you these words. Now I'm going to use this. So x plus y ityatra, x ityatra eva parivartanam bhavati, y ityatra parivartanam na bhavati. So 6173 up to 6183, 11 sutras are about the purvadesha. So as soon as the samhitadhikara starts, there are sutras of purvadesha, 3 important purvadeshas, tugagamaha. So technically it is agama, but we'll include it in the purvadesha itself. Anagamakanam sagamakaha adeshaha. Almost everybody of you wrote it correctly in the exam. So agamas are also types of adeshas. So tugagama, yanadesha, so that's iko yanachi, yantavanta adesha, echo yavayavaha. So these 3 purvadeshas are in the initial section. You can see the sutras. You have Samhitayam, then Checha, Angmangosha, Dirghat, Padantatva. These all four are basically Tugagama. Then Iko Yanachi, so Yanadesha, and Echo Yavaya Vahavantoi Prate Dhatos Tanimitta Sevakshaya Jayo Shakyarte Krayas Tadarte Bhaya Pravaicha Chandasi. These are all Yantavanta Desha. So these three important Purvadesha related concepts are kept at the beginning of Samhitadhikara, and that is what we are going to learn in today's class. Obviously, we are not learning all the sutras. We are only going to learn very small number of sutras. So going back, so we start with Samhitayam. I'll talk about Samhitayam, which is like 1 minute. Then I'm going to talk about Checha. So we are going to learn the sutra called Checha. I'll skip Ang Mangosha. We are going to learn about Dirghat, Padantadva, Ikoyanachi, and Echo Yavayavaha. That's all we are going to learn. Nothing after that will be taught in this particular course. As I mentioned, this is Ashtadhyayi Parichaya. My goal is not to teach you all the sutras. We are not even going to learn what is in the Laghu Siddhanta Kaumudi. Laghu Siddhanta Kaumudi has 1200 sutras. Our goal of this course was 400 sutras. I expanded to 600 sutras, but still it is only 50% of Laghu Siddhanta Kaumudi. So the goal is only to get you introduced, not to teach everything, not to just feed, but just to teach small amount and make sure you understand it. So we are only going to learn these 5 sutras, Checha, Dirghat, Padantatva, Iko Energy, Echo Yavayavaha, and we are done with the topic of Purvadesha. That is the topic of today's class. Then after the Purvadesha is the Adhikara called Ekaf Purva Parayoho, and we are going to talk about Ekadesha. So X plus Y, X and Y both change. 5 types of Ekadeshas are there. Guna Ekadesha, Vruddhi Ekadesha, Pararupa Ekadesha, Savarnadirgha Ekadesha, and Purva Rupa Ekadesha. That is the material of tomorrow's class. So we are going to talk about the Ekadesha in tomorrow's class. And then after the Ekadeshas, there is a very special section in the Samhitadhikara, which is called Prakruti Bhava. Prakruti Bhava means Ach Sandhi Vishishtam Sutram Vidyate, Samhita api Vidyate, Parantu Sandhi Karyam na Bhavati. There are specific cases where Sandhi Karya is blocked. So for example, if you take phale, phalam, phale, phalani, prathama dvivachanam, phale plus ete or phale plus iti, you cannot do the sandhi over there. There are reasons why you cannot do, but there are certain specific situations where Atsandhi Vishishta sutras are there. Samhita is also expected. We shouldn't say Samhitayam Satyam, we should say Samhitayaha Vivakshayam. There is an expectation that Samhita is there, but still Sandhi Karya will not happen. That is going to be the topic of the 3rd class. So 3 classes in sequence, we are going to talk about Ach Sandhi. In today's class, you will say it's not even why I'm saying today's class, because I have not even started teaching sutras. But don't worry, sutras are very easy. We are going to talk about Tugagama, Yanadesha, and Yantavantadesha. So these are the sutras that we are going to talk in today's class. Maximum 15 to 20 minutes, we should be done. Any further questions before we move to the actual sutras? Ratnakar Mahoday.
Namaste Acharya, after a long time again. The thing is, do you suggest that as many of the Indian languages are evolved from Sanskrit, do you suggest that first of all we should learn some local language Sanskrit? Like I am from Telugu and some are from Tamil Nadu, some are from Marathi and all. So do you suggest that to understand this in a proper manner or to be more authentic like?
I think it is very useful, but let's park this question. Let me talk about the topic first and then I'll come back. Okay?
Because one of the Vyakarna teachers, she studied Telugu Vyakarna and then she started teaching Sanskrit. Basically, she's a Sanskrit Vyakarna. But she said that I learned Telugu Vyakarna first.
Let me stop you. Let me first finish the topic and then we'll come to this. Okay?
Chalo,
because I'm running out of time. Okay. Okay, so let's start with the actual sutras. Adya Dhiyamanani Sutrani. Let's start with the Samhita Adhikaraha. So, the 61st Sutra, we have already studied 60 sutras in the course. So, 61st Sutra, Samhitayam. Sutras are very simple. That's why I took so much time for the introduction. Ita Uttaram, Anudattam Padameka Varjam, Etasmad Pragyadvakshamaha, Samhitayam Ityeva Tadveditavyam. Starting from this sutram till the before of Anudattam Padameka Varjam. So 61158, I'm scrolling down, 61158 is Anudattam Padameka Varjam. It's over here. So till before that, which is same as saying Paraskara Prabhutini iti yavat. So you can say the last sutra and say iti yavat, or you can say the next sutra and you say etasmat prak. So Anudattam Padameka Varjam etasmat prag yadvakshamaha. Whatever will be told, Samhitayam ityeva tadveditavyam. So Samhitayam, Varnanam Atishay Sannidhyam ityuti Samhita, and this Samhitayam is Vishaya Saptami. We have talked about Vishaya Saptami. Samhitayaha Vishaye ityukte Samhita yada ishyate, when there is anticipation or when there is a concept, when there is a topic of Samhita, these particular karyas happen. So that's what Padamanjari Kara also explains. Karyi nimittayoho. Karyi means a sthani, that is your x. Nimitta is your y. So karyi nimittayoho, x plus y, ityatra samhitayam vishayabhutayam, not samhitayam satyam. That's what I was saying again and again. When there is a concept of samhita in the mind, whatever karya is being told in the adhikara, vakshamanam karyam bhavati. So samhitayam vishayabhutayam vakshamanam karyam bhavati. You should not say samhitayam satya. Many books do it. I also have done it many times, but it is technically incorrect. Why? Because as soon as you say samhitayam satyam, it means that for for one moment samhita exists and then sandhi is happening. So adau samhita ekam kshanam yavat adau samhita tatha sandhi iti artha bhavati. When you use a sati saptami, say Rame agate Krishnaha gacchati. So Rama comes, then there is a moment of overlap and then the Krishna goes. So if you end up in using sati saptami over here, it will mean that there is a samhita for a moment, even when the two padas are separate, and then sandhi is happening. That is not what is ever meant. Samhita and sandhi come together. Samhitayaha vivakshayameva sandhi karyamasti. Ataha संहितायां सत्यां क्षणं यावत् अपि पदयोः पृथक् उपस्थितिः नैव संभवति. And therefore you should not say samhitayam satyam, you should say samhitayaha vishaye, no chet samhitayam vishaya bhutayam. That's the reason I picked up this line from the commentary. Very beautiful word. Samhitayam vishaya bhutayam vakshamanam karyam bhavati. So this is Adhikara Sutra. I have already explained this. Asmin Adhikare Patitani Karyani Samhitaya Vishaye Bhavanti Iko Yanachi Ityanena Ikvarnasya Achvarane Pare Samhitayaha Vishaye Yan Adeshaha Bhavati, and so on. You already know all this. Samhitaya Vishayana Asti Chit Iti plus Api Ityeva Tishtati. So that's all about the Samhita Adhikara. Let's go back to the Samhitayam Sutra. The next one is Checha. Very simple sutram again. Checha Rasvasya Che Pare Ityukte Chakare Pare Tugagamah Syat Samhitayam. So we will always add the word Samhitayam at the end of every description in the next 10 classes. So Rasvasya Che Pare Tugagamah Syat Samhitayam. Rasvasya and Tuka come as an anuvritti. So if you see the sutra over here, Rasvasya and Tuka come as an anuvritti in Checha. So Rasvasya Che Tuka. This is the full sutram. Rasvaswarasya, it's written over here. Samhitayam is the adhikara. So anuvritti and adhikara sahitam sutram. Rasvasya Che Tuka Samhitayam. So again, Rasvasya ityukte rasvaswarasya. So when there is a rasvaswara and when there is a chakara in front, तुक् इति आगमः भवति। ह्रस्वस्वरात् अनन्तरं संहितायां छकारः विद्यते चेत् ह्रस्वस्वरस्य तुक् इति आगमः भवति. It is a kit agama. Adyantau takito means it will be added after the hrasva swara. So snigdha cha asau chaya. Deep what chaya, the what is the word, whatever. So snigdha cha asau chaya. Snigdha plus chaya. So there is a karmadharaya samasa that happens. Snigdha becomes snigdha. You don't have to worry about that prakriya. Snigdha plus chaya. There is akara and then there is a chakara. So hrasva swarad anantaram chakara. Tatra tugagamaha bhavati. Hrasva swarasya tugagamaha bhavati. Somebody is saying shadow. It's very hard to switch the languages, but snigdha chaya, the deep shade or dense shade or shadow, something like that. So snigdha plus chaya, akarasya tugagama bhavati, kakarasya itsamnya lopaha ukara uchcharanartha sahapi gacchati ta iti avashishyate. So snigdha ta chaya, and then further transformation happens, which we will learn in hal sandhi. So takar se jashtvam bhavati. Most of you are already aware. So takar se jashtve dakaraha, dakar se chutve jakaraha, jakar se chartve chakaraha. So do not convert ta directly to ch. So even though snigdha plus ta plus chaya, the final form is snigdha chaya, you are not allowed to convert ta directly to ch. You must convert ta to the to j to ch. That's the order. If you do not know this, I highly recommend go to Ashtadhyayi YouTube channel. I have around 12 classes or probably more, 20 classes I think, on hal sandhi. So specifically a bunch of 10-15 classes are there on hal sandhi, small. Each class is just 3 to 5 minutes. Watch them. In those classes, I have exactly explained how hal sandhi happens in multiple different cases. So why ta cannot be directly converted to ch, why ta has to go through the, j, ch, you will learn it. If you are confused about this, I highly recommend you go and watch that. All your concepts of hal sandhi will be thoroughly clear, which will be required when we move to the hal sandhi prakaranam a few classes later. Anyway, so that creates the final form. Snigdha chaya is there in Meghadutam. Snigdha chaya tarushu vasatim ramagiri ashrameshu. So that's basically snigdha chaya, the tugagama and the final form. And how do you write the prakriya? In today's homework, the first question itself is going to be prakriyam darshayata. So almost all homeworks are going to have such a question. So how do you write the prakriya? You write the prakriya in as details as you can. You can skip the sutras if it are not taught, but steps should be written. So snigdha cha asau chaya, that is the karmadharya samasa. Snigdha chaya, so you create the two pratipadikas, pumat bhava happens. So snigdha becomes snigdha. You can ignore that because that's not taught. But samase samhita nitya, explain why there is a samhita. So samase samhita nitya, then tugagamaha bhavati, che cha iti dhakarottarasya akarasya tugagamaha, explain this. Adyantau takitau iti antyavayavaha, then ka goes and u goes. So halantyam iti kakarasya itsamnya tasya lopaha iti lopaha, takarottara ukara uchcharanarthaha saha lupyate, snigdha da chaya. So takar se jashtve dakaraha, just write it as it is. I have not yet taught you. Dakar se chutve jakaraha, jakar se chartve chakaraha. Finally, you get snigdha chaya as the final form. So that completes the sutram. As I mentioned, sutras are very easy. So che cha is completed. I am going to skip ang mangoscha. We will directly go to the next sutram, dirghat. The current sutram che cha was about the hraswa swara. Now the next sutram dirghat is about the dirgha swara. So dirghat che pare tugagamaha syat. Same story except for hraswa there is dirgha. So dirghat che pare tugagamaha, purvasya tugagamaha bhavati. Remember, understand a small difference in the sutra construction. Earlier it was hraswasya. So if you go to the previous slide and see how the anuvritti is coming, it was hraswasya. So technically Panini could have written dirghasya instead of dirghat, but he uses the word dirghat panchami. Not a big deal. The commentaries say that there is no difference over here. Dirghat is same as dirghasya. सो दीर्घात् इत्युक्ते दीर्घस्वरस्य यद्यपिदं पञ्चम्यन्तमस्ति तथापि व्याख्यानसामर्थ्यात् व्याख्यानतो विशेषप्रतिपत्तिर्नहि सन्देहादलक्षणम्. So व्याख्यान सामर्थ्यात् this is taken just like ह्रस्वस्य, just like that here दीर्घस्य. So दीर्घस्वरस्य छकारे परे तुगागमः भवति. So दीर्घस्वरादनन्तरं संहितायां छकारः विद्यते चेत् दीर्घस्वरस्य तुक् आगमः भवति. म्लेच्छ इति धातुः अस्ति धातुपाठे. दिस इज एन एग्जांपल. म्लेच्छ इति धातुपाठे विद्यमानः धातुः औपदेशिक फॉर्म इज म्लेच्छ. What happens is अस्य धातोः औपदेशिक रूपे. So this is actually a prakrutika karya. Before even the pratyaya is attached, ekarasya chakare pare tugagamah bhavati. So mlech, there is an ekar which is a dirgha swara, and then there is a chakara. So tugagamah bhavati mleta ch, and then the same process takarasya dakara, dakarasya jakara, jakarasya chakara. Finally mlech इति सिद्ध्यति. So mlech it is aupadeshika dhatu, but the prakritika karya step converts it to mlech. The process is by the sutram dirghat. So that's about the next sutram. That's dirghat. Where is the website? Yeah. So checha and dirghat. Now here is one question that should come to your mind. Maybe it's already 1 hour, so little bit saturated. But there is a sutram called checha which is for the hraswa swara, and there is a sutram called dirghat which is for the dirgha swara. Why create two sutras, one for hraswa and one for dirgha? Just combine everything and say tugagamaha bhavati. So why split it out into a hraswa swara and dirgha swara? The answer is that there is a vikalpa for the dirgha swara which is given in the next sutram. So that vikalpa is only applicable for a dirgha swara, not for the hraswa swara. So Panini creates hraswa swara separately, I mean the rule for the hraswa swara separately, and the rule for dirgha swara. There is a vikalpa. That's the next sutram we are going to talk. It's padantadva. Most of you should be able to understand the meaning. Dirghat padantadva. So dirgha swaraha padasya ante asti, like mala. It's a pada, prathama ekvachanam. Tasya ante dirgha swaraha asti, tarhi va vikalpena tugagama bhavati. This is the reason why I did not give a samasa like snigdha chaya in the previous dirghat sutram. Because anytime there is a samasa, there is a purva pada and there is a uttara pada, and as soon as a pada comes in the picture, the padantadva sutram makes the tugagama optional. Therefore, I had to choose a specific example called mlecha, where there is no pada involved, and give that as an example for the previous sutram. So when there is a pada as the x entity in x plus y is already obviously ch. The x entity, when it is a pada, padantat samhitayam, dirghat padantat samhitayam, che pare tuk vikalpena bhavati. So padantadva, dirghat padantat, che pare tuk vasyat. When there is a padante vidyamana dirghaswara vikalpena tugagamaha bhavati. So padante vidyamana dirghaswaradanantaram samhitayam chakaraha vidyate chet dirghaswarasya vikalpena tuk agamaha bhavati. Now the previous sutram dirghat was already talking about the compulsory tugagama, but in a special case it is being optionally negated. So purvam praptasya vikalpaha prapta vibhasha. So this is an example of prapta vibhasha. Purvam praptasya pakshikaha nishedhaha. Example, Lakshmyaha chaya. You do a samasa. Now this is a samasa. Samase samhita nitya. Samhitayam satyam sandhihi api nityaha bhavati. But this nitya sandhi is optional. What does it mean? Compulsory you have to do the sandhi. But when you try doing the sandhi, it says, okay, you might do it or might not do it. I'll allow both. So Lakshmi plus Chaya, if you want to do the sandhi by the sutram padantadva, Lakshmi t Chaya tugagamaha bhavati. The normal process dakara, jakara, chakara, ante Lakshmi Chaya with a ch. It is siddhyati. And this is optional. सो अयं तुगागमः वैकल्पिकः पक्षे तुगागमं विना लक्ष्मी छाया इति अपि साधुरूपम् एव सिद्ध्यति। अनेन प्रकारेण पदान्ते विद्यमानात् दीर्घवर्णात् छकारः संहितायां विद्यते चेत् दीर्घस्वरस्य विकल्पेन तुगागमः भवति। For the hraswa it is compulsory, there is no choice. For dirgha it is optional. And you remember this, when you have separate words, samhita itself is optional. So when samhita is not there, there is no question of sandhi. When samhita is there, for the hraswa swara tugagama is compulsory. For the dirgha swara, there is yet another level of option. The tugagama is optional. And if the tugagama does not happen, samhita is still there. So you have to write it together like Lakshmi Chaya. You have to pronounce it together. You just don't have to pronounce an extra chakar over there. So that's padantadva. That completes the che. So we are done with checha, we are done with dirghat and padantadva. Two more sutras remaining, iko yanachi and echo yavayavaha. I think most of you or all of you probably already know these sutras. Iko yanachi, ikaha sthane yan syad achi samhitayam. So ik varnasya sthane samhitayam yan varnaha bhavati yada ach varnaha pare asti ched. सो इकः इति उद्देश्यं स्थानी, अचि इति उद्देश्यं परनिमित्तं, यण इति विधेयम्, इक् वर्णस्य स्थाने अव्यवहिते अच् वर्णे परे संहितायां यण आदेशः भवति. We have talked about this. स्थानेन्तरतमा इत्यनेन उच्चारणस्थानमनुसृत्य तत्र आदेशनिर्णयः भवति. सो इकारस्य स्थाने यकारः, उवर्णस्य स्थाने वकारः, रुवर्णस्य स्थाने रेफः, लुवर्णस्य स्थाने लकारः, and so on. Kashika Kara allows Yatha Sankham also. So remember, we have discussed this in one of the previous classes. Technically, Yatha Sankham is not allowed over here because Yana only has 4 Yara, L, and Ik has 7 E, U, Ru, Ru, and Lu. And there is no match between 7 and 4. But Kashika Kara, the Nyasa Vyakhyana and the Padamanjiri Vyakhyana of the Kashika, they say Yatha Sankham is also okay. They do not separate out E and E. They just say E, U, Ru, Lu as 4 and Yer, L, V, so Yer, V, L as 4. So there is Yatha Sankham. So Kashikayaha Nyasa Vyakhyane Padamanjari Vyakhyane यथा संख्यत्वात् अपि आदेशनिर्णयं कर्तुं शक्नुमः इति उक्तमस्ति. इकां यणां च साम्यात् यथा संख्यं भवति. This is obviously arguable, but I am just telling that there is not always unanimity across the commentaries. Some commentaries talk something which is not 100% logical. This is an example over here. And remember how is the sutra constructed? Ikka varnat ach varne pare, but it cannot be the same ach varna. So E plus A is fine. That will give you yanadesha. Yanadesha on the purva letter. So it is a purvadesha. Ik varnasya yanadesha bhavati. Ach is not transformed at all. So that's all okay when there is E plus A, E plus A, E plus U and so on. But if you have a savarna ach letter, then yanadesha is blocked by savarna dirgha. We are going to talk about it in tomorrow's class. So yana plus achi ityatra, sorry, not this. Where is this? Okay, I'll come to that particular topic. I think there is one more thing is there on the slide. I forgot. Let me anyway explain that. Look at how the sutra is created. Yana plus achi. Ikaha plus yana plus achi. If you combine yana plus achi with rules of grammar, technically ngamodagama sandhi should happen. So, and you should say yannachi. Like how you say tasmin niti nirdishte purvase. Tasmin plus iti becomes tasmin niti. In the same way, yana plus achi by ngamodagama sandhi, it should become yannachi. Double nakara should happen. The ngamodagama sandhi is not optional. You have to do it. Yannachi. So ngamodagame krute यण्णचीति सिद्ध्यति, परंतु महर्षिणा नमुडागमं विना एव यणचि इति पदं प्रयुक्तमस्ति. सौत्रत्वात् साधु. You cannot say Panini Maharshi made a mistake. So सूत्रं सर्वदा साधु अस्ति इति मत्वा सौत्रत्वात् अस्य साधुत्वं स्वीक्रियते. विद्याजी.
तत्र किमर्थं संहिता इष्यते इति स्वीकृत्य महोदय?
संहिता नास्ति चेत् वर्णमेलनमपि न सम्भवति।
न
यण्
तत्र इन् इको यण् अचि इति वक्तुं शक्नुमः।
इको यण् अचि इति वक्तुं शक्नुमः, परन्तु यण् अचि इति वक्तुं न शक्नुमः यथा सूत्रं रचितं।
तत्र लेखने एव आगच्छति खलु महोदय, तत्र आदौ पुरा तु तत्र यण् अचि इति जनाः उक्तवन्तः स्यात् किल, उक्तवन्तः।
यण् तदनन्तरं यण् इत्यस्मात् अनन्तरं विरामः स्यात्. इफ् देर् इस् नो विराम देन् यू केनाट् से यण् अचि.
तदेव
in general, let me explain. And in general, सर्वेषु सूत्रेषु संहिता विद्यते इति सिद्धान्तः अस्ति. किमर्थम् इति चेत् सूत्ररटनसमये सूत्रपठनसमये पॉज यतिः कुत्र स्वीकर्तव्य इति चेत् एकस्मात् सूत्रात् अनन्तरम् अपरस्य सूत्रस्य उच्चारणात् पूर्वं तत्र किञ्चित् विरामः स्वीकरणीयः. Within a sutra you cannot take a virama. This is a general convention. Therefore, yan plus achi, it is expected that there is a samhita, and therefore you have to combine it as yan achi. Don't change the sutra. We are not changing the sutra. We are just saying sautratvat sadhu. Examples, I probably don't need to go through it. Go through these on your own. Dadhi plus atra, dadhyatra, madhviti, pitrajna, lakruti, and so on. And this is what the badhya badaka bhava I was talking earlier. So ikvarnat avyavahita paraha savarnaha achvarnaha vidyate. So e plus e, u plus u, ru plus ru, and lu plus lu, and so on. Or ru plus lu is also fine because they are savarna. So anena sutrena uktam yanadesham badhitva akassavarणे दीर्घ इत्यनेन सवर्ण दीर्घ एकादेशः भवति, which is the topic for tomorrow's class. And therefore, so some examples are also given. So nadi plus iyam, sadhu plus ukti, and so on. But this is the topic for tomorrow's class. For today, we have to understand अस्य सूत्रस्य प्रसक्तिः असवर्णे अच्वर्णे परे एव वर्तते. सूत्रे असवर्णे इति नास्ति, परन्तु बाध्यबाधकभावम् अनुसृत्य the final effect is that असवर्णे अच्वर्णे परे एव अस्य सूत्रस्य प्रयोगः भवति. So that completes the iko yanachi, and now final sutram echo yavayavaha. That's again yantavantadesha, the sutra of ayadi sandhi. It is again purvadesha itself, because the h letter is converted to aya, ava, aya, or ava. There is no transformation on the par letter. Y is not changing, only x is changing. So h varnasya aya, ava, aya, avaha iti adeshaha bhavanti. So achi comes as an anuvritti from the immediate previous sutra iko yanachi samhitayam iti adhikaraha echaha aya ava aya avaha achi samhitayam. Ech is the sthani a I o au. Achi iti paranimittam uddesham. Aya ava aya ava iti vidheyam. These are the adeshas. So in the previous sutram ika was becoming yana. In this sutram h is becoming aya ava aya ava. Identical configuration. So h varnasya sthane avyavahite achvarne pare samhitayam aya ava aya ava ete adeshaha bhavanti. Now here you can use yatha sankyam. So ekarasya sthane aya, okarasya sthane ava, and so on. We have already talked about this in while studying the yatha sankyam sutra. An interesting point over here is that if you look at these particular adeshas, aya, ava, aya, ava, the question is this an upadesha? Upadesha is what? Adyocharanam. Panini Maharshina yaduktam. So Panini Maharshi has pronounced these, has given these in their original form like aya, ava, aya, ava. So these are actually upadeshas, like the dhatu patha, the gana patha, the sutras are also upadeshas. So these adeshas are upadeshas, and adesha agama shaiva upadesha prakirtitaha. We all know this shloka. So aya, ava, aya, ava are upadeshas. Therefore, halantyam sutram should kick in, and halantyam iti sutrena upadeshanam ante vidyamanasya vyanjanasya itsamnya tadanantaram cha tasya lopaha ityanena lopaha bhavet. So for aya, ava, aya, and ava, technically this is a upadesha. Therefore halantyam is going to cause an itsamnya and tasya lopa is going to cause a lopa. but that itsamnya has no value, tatra itsamnyayaha kimepi prayojanam nasti. And remember, I have explained this, prayojanam nasti ched itsamnya na bhavati. We have seen while studying the sutras like Chutu, if there is no prayojana, the adistha chakara and takara doesn't become itsamyaka. In the same way here, the end letters yakara and vakara of these adeshas, there is no prayojana of making their itsamnya, atah tesham itsamnya na bhavati. सूत्रे अय अव आय आव एतेषाम् आदेशरूपेण उपदेशः कृतः अस्ति, परन्तु अत्र एतेषां हलन्त्यमिति संज्ञा भवितुमर्हति, सा किमर्थं न भवति इति चेत् प्रयोजनस्य अभावात् न भवति इति अत्र उत्तरम्. And then you have some examples. All these examples should be well known to you already. G plus aniyar, G becomes J. There is a sutram you don't need to worry about. Plus G plus aniyar, G becomes J. J plus aniyar, and then J becomes a y. What kind of typing mistake is this? A y. So J, A becomes a y. So Jayanya, it is Siddhyati. So G plus A, Jayanya. Another example, 1A plus iti. So 1A becomes a y. 1y plus iti, 1yiti. In case of this 1yiti, there is also a lopa possible by lopa shakalya. We are going to talk about it in the sutras of the Halsandhi Prakaranam. If the lopa happens, you get 1 iti. You all know it. I'm just telling the sutra over here. There is a sutra that will cause an optional lopa. So 1 iti, 1 iti. So that's ekarasya ayadesha. Similarly, okarasya avadesha, bhu plus a near, bhu becomes bho. That's anga karya that I'm not teaching right now. Just assume that it happens. Bho plus aniya, okarasya avadesha, bhavaniya. Another example, sadho plus iti, sadhaviti. By lopa shakalyasya, sadha iti is also possible. Similarly, I and au, aikarasya ayadeshaha. So ni plus nvul, nvul pratyanta form. Ni plus aka, ni becomes a nai. That's all anga karya. So you have nai plus aka, and now I becomes aya. So nayaka. Similarly, vandai plus iti, vandayiti. And finally, okarasya avadesha, bhu plus nvul, bhu plus aka, bhu becomes bhau. Bhau plus aka, au becomes av, bhavaka, balau iti becomes balaviti, and so on. So in this particular way, the examples of echo yavayavaha can be given. And then there is an exception of echo yavayavaha. You all know this. Padanta ekarat, padanta okarat, hrasva akaraha anantaram asti chet, echo yavayavaha ityanena praptasya ayadesham avadeshasya apavada rupena eng of padanta dati. This is a sutram that might be new. We are going to learn it tomorrow. But purva rupa ekadesha bhavati. So 1a plus asmin becomes 1asmin. Sadho plus atra becomes sadhotra. So this is actually 1a. So ekara and ach letter is there. So ayadi sandhi should happen. By blocking that, there is purva rupa ekadesha. So a plus a become a, o plus a becomes O. And this is only for the Padanta Ekara and Padanta Okara. Apadanta Ekara Okara yoho vishaye ayam badhaha na pravartate. So, me plus lut, me plus ana, lut pratyanta form, me becomes ne as an angakarya. Ne plus ana, here also the configuration is like 1a plus asmin, like ne plus ana. But here the Purvarupa Ekadesha does not happen because this is not a pada. Ne is not a pada. The entire thing is also not a pada, but ne is not a pada. That's what matters. Here, vane saptami ekvachanam is a pada. Sadho sambodhana ekvachanam is a pada. So in the previous case, the Purvarupa Ekadesha comes by blocking the Yantavanta Desha, but that's not the case in case of apadanta ekara and okara. Similarly, bhavana ityatrapi purvarupa ekadesha na bhavati. So that's all. As I mentioned, the sutras were very easy. Checha, dirghat and padantadva. These are all about tugagama, which is a purvadesha. Iko yanachi. This is about the yanadesha, again purvadesha. echo yava yava, it is yantavantadesha, again purvadesha. In this way, we have studied the important sutras of purvadesha. Now in tomorrow's class, we are going to move to ekadesha. A few more sutras are there in tomorrow's class, I think 8 or 9, but there is no time going to be spent for introduction. So as soon as the class starts, we are going to start studying the sutras. So we should be able to finish within 1 hour or 1 hour 15 minutes and so on. So that's it. Here is the homework. Prakriyam darshayata. So you have to write the prakriya. Yatra sutram na pathitam tatra sutram mina kevalam karyameva lekhaniyam. And then sanshepena uttarata. 2-3 lines answers. So iko yanachi tatha echo yavayavaha ityetayoho kau badhakau. I have explained it. Krupayaha chhatram ityatra samase krute kim siddhyati. Then there is a statement given from Bala Manoramakara. You have to explain in simple Sanskrit what it means. Samhiteikapade nitya iti shlokam purayitva spashtikurut. Samhitayam ityatra kidrushi saptami kaha arthaha atra sat saptami kimartham na svikriyate. So I have also answered this. The deadline for the homework is exactly 10 days. After the 10 days, those who of you submitted will get the score, others will get 0, and the answers will be uploaded on the 11th day. Samapayamaha. If there are any subject related questions, I am ready to take. Otherwise, we'll talk about other topics in some other day because we're already significantly ahead of time. Ratnakar Mahoday.
Acharya, in Lakshmi Chaya, you said it is Lakshmi Chaya. But why is that not Lakshmiyaha Chaya?
Because you are doing, I mean, Lakshmiyaha, you cannot do Tugagama over here because there is no Rasva Swara or Dirgha Swara. The Tugagama happens only when there is a Swara. This is a Samasa that is happening. So Purvapada is Lakshmi, there is a Shashti Tatpurusha Samasa. Purvapada is Lakshmi, Uttarapada is Chaya. So now here Lakshmi plus Chaya is written and then Samasa is happening. Okay. And therefore that causes Tugaga. Any further questions? अस्तु समापयामः. श्वः नियमितरूपेण कक्षा भविष्यति. अष्टाध्यायी जगन्माता यस्य चित्तात् समुत्थिता वेदानाम् उपकाराय तस्मै पाणिनिये नमः. शब्दब्रह्म समाराध्य कृतवान्यो विलक्षणं सर्वाश्चर्यमिदं शास्त्रं तस्मै पाणिनिये नमः. येन धौता गिरः पुंसां विमलैः शब्दवारिभिः तमश्चाज्ञानिजं भिन्नं तस्मै पाणिनिये नमः. धन्यवादः.